Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Those of you that are here in person and those of you that are watching this, I'd like to call to order the Rapid City Area School study session for tonight. Shirley, may we have a roll call, please?
Troy Carr,
Here.
Jamie Clapham,
Here.
Christine Stephenson,
Here.
Deb Baker,
Here.
Michael Berkland.
Here.
Walt Swan,
Here.
Kate Thomas.
Present.
Thank you.
May we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, on to the approval of the proposed agenda. We are not having an executive session on tonight unless anybody here says otherwise now. So I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda, omitting or deleting item 7, the executive session.
Second.
All in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. All right, we have one person tonight wishing to address the board, and that is Sarah Gross. Sarah Gross, is up to you.
I'm on. Okay. Hello, my name is Sarah Gross. I'm a parent, teacher, and active member of our Rapid City area schools community. On Saturday, we had a film festival featuring all 23 schools. It was a year-long project, and through it, I've learned some important things and formed some strong opinions that I would like to share with you. Numerous sponsors supported the endeavor. I didn't name them very well, and I thought that it was good to do, but ARC Architecture, Highmark, RCEA, SDEA, the Public School Foundation using a matching grant at Black Hills by Choice, the Arts Council, Security Bank, among individual donors supported the project. We easily spent over $12,000 on the timeline, displays, copies, and technologies and food to have the event. I found out a ton of information on rural school districts that's really hard to find. Old Rapid City journals were my main source, and a bill passed in the 1960s called Senate Bill 130 started a process to consolidate smaller school districts into Rapid City. I found that there are common school districts and independent school districts, and I didn't know what the difference was, and I even called the state, and they said, like, it's just something that's kind of gone by 50 years ago, but a common district was K-8, whereas an independent was full K-12, perhaps 1-8 at that time. But what I learned is that 19 different common districts have been consolidated or dissolved into Rapid City. And I thought it was fascinating because, like I told you at a previous board meeting, Mattoon Schoolhouse was right next door to where I currently teach at South Park. I also found PTA scrapbooks, and I love them. It's slightly an obsession because they're like gold. They had a contest, and so they're really high quality history markers of our school district. And what I found was that PTAs used to range in the hundreds. Parents were more involved as room parents, and storage is a premium. And so many of these have been thrown away over the years, but they're absolutely my favorite. And so they were on display on Saturday, and then everything from the project will either go to the foundation or to the school district. So I plan to give a copy, and I don't know where you'll put it, but I hope it'll be electronic as well as the ones that I had copied. So by my count, the average age of schools in Rapid City is 59.36 years old. After South comes online, it will shrink the average to 56.76. And then with the closure of Canyon Lake, east and west, it drops to 51.72. I can find nothing on Lincoln Elementary. It just got cleaned out. But Evie Berquist, we were able to, I think Lori Ruink, I think I said her last name wrong, but she had a brick from the old building. It was on display on Saturday. It was really cool. That building closed in 2004 at the age of 52. And so now it's community health. Funding, through the project, I've also learned a lot about how the buildings were funded. And so for the not so nifty 50, I read the number of bonds that had passed and how that had worked. I learned though that a bond is the primary mechanism for funding a building. And so this led me to wonder a couple of things. I wonder if the capital outlay transfers, and I don't know this, so this is me brainstorming a little bit, but I remember when I first came into the district that there were capital outlay transfers, one-time general, there were transfers made. And I'm wondering if our 50 years of not passing a bond has led to some of those funds having to slide around in order to fund the necessary maintenance and buildings that we did build. And so my neighbor drives out of her driveway every morning. I drive out of my driveway every morning. She drives to Douglas and I drive to Rapid City, just a couple blocks away. But I think she makes over $10,000 more than I do. And I continue to wonder why. And so these are some of the conclusions that I've come to after studying it kind of obsessively for a year. So I have about a two-part conclusion. One, without a strong PTO mechanism to drive support for a bond, or a robust newspaper, that we need as many voters engaged in the process. And so I've kind of come to a conclusion that a special election doesn't drive out the population that votes for a bond. And so that could be wrong. I need to look back at the Civic Center vote, whether that was a special election or a general election. But overall, I really have enjoyed doing the project. I really gotten to dig deep into some things that not very many people have gotten to, and had some really cool conversations with former superintendents, former teachers, former students in the district. And I really have probably grown my roots into public education even deeper, because the things that happen in our school buildings are so phenomenal. And I think Christine asked me a question months ago that said, well, like, what would you do? And I thought about my old 74-year-old building, and I love it so much. I just think the walls need to be tore down a little bit inside so that there's modern space, because the space from the 1950s and 60s and our children, you know, in the space that they require today is greater. So coming through the project, it was very, very, very historical. I've pulled out some really cool resources, and I really appreciate everyone who either was interviewed for the project or came and supported it in one way or another. And so, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, at this time, we'll have board response to the open forum. Superintendent Swaggart.
Thank you, Bishop Carr. I did want to share, one thing I just heard was about the salaries that are paid in Douglas. I learned recently that Impact Aid, which funds Douglas, which is federal money, does not count as local effort. So when their cup is being filled with local property tax, a lot of their property is not taxed because it's federal property in their district, which is much smaller than ours. But when they get replacement dollars for that, it doesn't fill their cup. The rest of their cup is filled with state aid. And then on top of that, they get impact aid. So it is absolutely impossible for Rapid City area schools to match them in that situation, because we do not receive millions of dollars in impact aid on top of our local effort and our state aid. And I wanted to share that to clarify that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Clapham.
And so many things I could say. That the event was phenomenal. The time, the energy, the effort that Mrs. Gross and others put in is just, I'm so grateful for. I do think it's a great launching pad for a bond. And I think the feedback and the information and just thinking about things like modern space and the fact that the schools didn't have computers when they were built 50 years ago, they didn't need Wi-Fi, they didn't, all of those are really, really important. And that we as a board are listening. And I think that that background and historic information really, as it is really beneficial to us, and we're very appreciative of that.
Okay, Mrs. Stephenson.
Thanks. I did just want to publicly, I've thanked you before. I just want to publicly thank you, all the sponsors. I appreciate that you gave a list of them, because that's really important. And that was a huge community effort. I just wanted to tell you personally, the experience on Saturday and the previous one, when people were sharing their memories, it just really reiterated how much schools are a part of our community. Like, we think of it as like, I'm a parent, or we think of it like you're a part of the school district when you're a kid or when you're a parent, but you're not. You're a part of the school district your entire lifespan. That when you're a part of this community, you're a part of the district. And I think that was a really great thing to celebrate over the course of the last year. So I really very much appreciate it.
Anyone else? I would just like to thank you, Mrs. Gross, for Saturday's event. It was a wonderful, wonderful education. And considering that that's what our main job is, you did a wonderful job in educating us to the history of Rapid City area schools. It is, I will say, it will be a goal of mine to try to find some space to display what you've done and the work that other people have done, so that it's not loss, and it's, the school district is just like our houses. I mean, it fills up with stuff, and then there's no room for anything, and we just start packing stuff and forget stuff. But I think it would be a sad testimony to the district if we let this, all the work that you did and all the work that other people did, if we let it go to waste, and next year we wouldn't know where anything is. So it will be a goal of mine to try to advocate, to find some space to honor the work that you and other people have done. I think Mr. Sassy is on, and I don't know what his bond presentation is, but Mr. Sassy, if you can also add in that answering the question about capital outlay, because that's another, as we look to doing a bond, people are gonna ask, well, why can't we just do it out of capital outlay? And there's a very understandable and specific reason why that happens, and it hopefully will address your question. So thank you so very much for all your hard work. All right, anybody else? All right, number 6, items for discussion. Dr. Corey Strasser is coming to give us an update. Strasser. Did I say that wrong?
Strasser.
Strasser, okay. Will come and give us an update on Rapid City Alternative Academy.
All right. Good evening, members of the board. Tonight, we're going to talk about Rapid City Alternative Academy. And I want to share with you the purpose of this presentation is to give an overview of the progress and our intentions for programming for RCAA for the 24-25 school year. As this is an overview of the direction we are taking, we wanted to share that direction. And then as we go along, give you an opportunity to ask questions. You'll learn a lot about it as we go. So maybe more questions towards the end. But if there is something burning that you want clarified, by all means. As you can see on this first page, there are several members that comprise our team, and they've spent significant time, energy, and effort so far this year putting this together. I'm really thankful for the work that they've put in, knowing that we have a lot of work yet to do. So that is our team. When we look at alternative education, we had to land on a definition so that we could have some clarity moving forward. So if you look at our definition, and we took this from the National Alternative Education Association. And it says alternative education serves students who require or thrive in an environment other than a traditional educational setting. This population of learners may face challenges in home, school, and or community. Their ability to receive services in a traditional academic setting may increase vulnerability to school failure. Alternative education strives to deliver equitable access to innovative approaches to teaching and learning, which provides students the opportunity to meet graduation requirements, prepare for post-secondary experiences, and participate as productive members of their communities. So we landed on this definition. When we looked at it, we feel it really encompasses the work that we're trying to do and to move our students forward. We know that alternative education is unique and it has to be different than what we see in our comprehensive high schools. And in doing so, meeting the needs of our at-risk students. So as we work through the process of program development, we've been very intentional in our system alignment. So this is the right side of this slide. And we do that because research has shown that is essential for high-performing schools. And I think this is important to be aware of how we look at building programs and the basis for that. So starting with the first one there, we have alignment with our district pillars. So we're very adamant that whatever we do flows from the pillars that we have. Predominantly, we work in the student pillar, but we know we touch on all 5 of them throughout building programs. We know that our leadership in this effort needs to come from the 9 organizational principles for organizational excellence. And that comes from our work with Studer and driving how we act as leaders. And I think that is important when we build programs. We also know that high quality schools share 4 components here. There's more to it, but these 4 I think are most applicable. They provide more resources for at-risk students than for others. They create clear gateways for students through the system with no dead ends. They have a highly coherent instructional system, and they connect with an effective system of career and technical education and training. And I think each one of those has a significant weight and value for putting the programming at RCAA together. So we share this with you so that you can really see how we think about our programs there. So when we get to the why, and you know, I want to say that you've had presentations come before, you've had information shared with you. So we do look at the data behind this, and the data behind this is really about 3 big areas, and that being about attendance, and that being about failure rates, and that being about behavior. So those 3 things we look at in terms of identifying, defining what at-risk is, and then moving forward in how we can support students who fall within that. In a moment, Mr. Stewart will share some of the key data behind the work that we're doing. And then we know, like I had mentioned, I know you've heard from people before, district leaders before, about different models of alternative education and how we can provide appropriate programming. I come from a background of a lot of experience in seeing different alternative programs come together. And I think all that's been valuable in creating our why and why we're doing this. We've taken a lot of input from our district leaders, predominantly at the high school level and the middle school level. And that's been very valuable in how we can best serve students. And we've taken input from families and students along the way as well, hearing how they want, what they want for their students. So that comprises the why, getting to our emerging needs. So, Mr. Stewart, he's going to share a little bit of information with you.
I, of course, have to adjust the microphone because I'm not quite as tall as he is. Dr. Strasser has handed me the data portion because he knows that I'm kind of one of those data nerds, so I like to play in the data. So I got 2 slides that I'm going to share with you. The first one, obviously, is the end game. Bishop Carr shared earlier that we're in the business of education, right? And our ultimate end game is graduation. And knowing that we've put a lot of effort in this district to try to improve our graduation rates. Now, as this slide says, our graduation rates haven't seen the level of improvement that we've desired with our actions and our incentives and accommodations that we've done. So we have to do something else. We got to do something more. So obviously that inspires the reason behind the why of alternative programming. So this slide just basically shows a very simplistic depiction of our graduation rates and how we haven't seen a whole lot of rise because we're not impacting those students that are at risk at this time as much as we would like to have. So this next slide is probably a lot more impactful because it shows the reasons why. When Dr. Strasser pointed out the 3 areas in which we're going to really hone in on the attendance, the behavior, and the failure rate, this slide is a very simplistic slide that looked at our middle schools and just our middle schools, because that's where we need to start getting them ready for that high school journey. And so this slide tells us that 16% of our middle school students at this time are meeting the at-risk range in at least 2 of those 3 areas. that equates numerically to just shy of about 500 students. Obviously, we don't have the capacity in what our plan to impact all 500. But what we can do is have the conversation at the school, at the comprehensive schools, and then have because we all know there's a story behind the data. And it may be easily repaired at the building, but some need a little bit more. So obviously that this data is going to drive that conversation. And I believe I turn it back over to Dr. Strasser.
Mr. Stewart,
Sure,
for clarity,
absolutely.
currently this school year, for sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, there's approximately 500 middle schoolers who are at risk, which comprises this 16%.
Sure. So for clarity, we pulled last year's numbers
Okay,
to give us an entire year's worth of data.
okay.
Okay?
Not this year, but.
Not this year, but I would assume if I was to pull up some range of data, we would look very similar to what data poll we did last year.
Okay.
So moving from the why to the what, you'll see that we're not really taking an approach that is way out there and way unique, but we want to bring in what we call high school prep. We know that there is a need for working with at-risk students, and the premise behind that is to get them prepared more for high school than what they're currently able to at their home school. So that's why we tentatively call it high school prep. That's the rationale behind that. And then I mentioned Eagles Path, and I want you to know that we have Eagles Path currently in place, but there are some things that we want to do differently there. So I'm going to let Mrs. Roberts come up and share how we're going to approach those.
So we did quite a bit of research to try to figure out, better. We did quite a bit of research to try to figure out what would be a good approach and what's something that is already working and is effective. And we found the Discovery curriculum, and it's been around for about 20 years. We were able to see it in action in a school that's been using it with middle school students for over 12 years. And it is a skills-based curriculum, and it uses a cohort model with smaller groups of students, and it's how they enter the program. So there's about 9 weeks worth of instruction that they do. And there are things that they're learning in there that are anger management skills, a variety of just communication skills, and some things that are bringing them back to how to be a learner and how to behave in school. And so we're planning to be using this with Eagles Path. Students will earn 1.5 credits of electives for improving in some of these skills. And then we would use it for the middle school with that high school prep program as well. So that would be their first 9 weeks in the program and kind of preparing them. And so we would have all of our staff trained in it so that everybody is on the same page. And then it would be students' entry point into the program. And so we're all kind of pulling in the same direction. And then there's a few things where we can cycle back around if a student is struggling and they're not meeting expectations, that we can really work with them to get them there. Some of those include a refocus room to kind of pull them back into where they need to be. And with the Discovery curriculum, a student would have a chance at 2 cycles of that if needed. The high school prep, so we're looking at that middle level program, and students would first try traditional middle school before they're being referred. We do see a lot of growth frequently between the elementary and middle school years. So we would be focused on developing the skills to succeed in high school, academic, social, emotional, and life skills. And they would be maintaining enrollment from the program admission through middle school graduation. So whenever they enter high school prep, they would stay there until they complete 8th grade. So we would be looking at a referral criteria, and in the enrollment process, we would have that full Discovery curriculum implementation. And they would be entering again in cohorts, and it would be that 9 weeks of curriculum to get them up to speed with what we're doing. And then we have some plans for transition, which would be for those students that need a place to go kind of off of the quarters when we're doing the 9 weeks worth. What can we do to support them while they're waiting to come in, or maybe the discovery isn't going well and they're waiting around to take another try at it. And so finding another way that we can support them so there aren't any dead ends for that. With the Eagles Path, we would be really working to kind of beef up that program that we've already got and working on developing some of those skills. One of the things that we heard the most and saw the most is that it really changes some of that motivation. And, you know, that's something we're really noticing is kind of that lack of motivation and interest in school. So we're really excited about that. So it is a distinct difference from the traditional schools, having this embedded throughout the entire program. And we're looking at more integration of some of the CTE into the curriculum, because we know that that also is something that is really really needed for our at-risk students. So yes,
And
Yeah.
this would all be at the same location.
yes, it would all be at the same location. Yeah, so, yep,
Can I ask a question too?
yes,
So at the same location, high school prep for middle schoolers, Eagles Path for high schoolers.
yes,
They have a 9-week discovery curriculum.
yeah.
So does that mean will the academy take referrals mid-year and put them in the discovery program, or is it the kids are referred at the beginning of the year, they do this discovery program, and then they get on with the rest of their school year?
The discovery program, getting into that takes 9 weeks, so they could be taken every quarter to start it. And so we could do that in full. And then we're planning on that transition space that we can use for some students that are needing a place to go immediately, but need to kind of wait until we're ready to start another cohort of the discovery training.
And is the discovery curriculum like a full-time, that's what they're doing all
Yeah.
day for that quarter?
It is, and we would be combining it with some English. They need 4 full credits of English in order to graduate. And there are many communication skills that they learn in the discovery program. And some of the things that they do as far as just learning about how to communicate in an adult voice, how to communicate their needs, how to advocate for themselves, how to get along with peers, how to get along with staff, what school behaviors are expected. So there's a lot for communication, and then there's quite a bit of writing. There's role play. There's a lot that goes on inside the discovery. And so it would kind of partner with that. So they're also getting a half credit of English at the same time in that term.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. So the readiness, we really anticipate the outcomes in that it helps our students with readiness for their next level, to increase that student motivation, to have higher rates of earned credit or academic achievement, leading to improved graduation, seeing improved attendance, helping students get to that on-track status and the development of social and life skills. And I will say when at the previous slide back when we were talking about things from students and parents and their input that we took into this, I was telling Dr. Strasser that I have had students and parents tell me that the student, you know, I wasn't ready for high school, and right now we don't have another option. The students really are too old to continue in middle school. Research shows that retention is not successful, so holding them back in other years. But the students themselves, even a couple of them said, I knew I wasn't ready and they sent me anyway. And so we're really looking to help remedy that. Also, sometimes at Eagles Path, we get students that we know didn't successfully complete middle school. Sometimes they were, didn't attend school in 8th grade at all, but it's not appropriate to have them in middle school with some of the other middle school age kids. And then, you know, how successful are they going to be as a 9th grader with that gap year? So.
Just a couple other quick thoughts on this. The intention is that our 6th grade students do not start at high school prep. It is something that we would look at later in the year, in the second semester. We firmly believe they have to try middle school first. Same thing with Eagles Path. If a student is at the high school prep program and they finish 8th grade, they are going to a comprehensive high school. And they have to try that first. And then if things don't work out, then we will work with them on a transition plan into the Eagles Path program, which would start with Discovery. So we feel very, very strongly that it is important that our kids stay connected to the middle school and the high school, and that this is an optional program for them if things don't work out the way that they'd like. So.
Quick question about referrals. So kids can not refer themselves to this program? That's a contrast to the Rapid City High School.
Yeah, we haven't established all the specifics on that yet. That's been a discussion point for us, but we're not looking at student-based referrals. We're working with referrals from the school, from a parent. That would be our primary point of emphasis.
So if a parent wanted to get their kid in this program, they would talk to their administrator at the middle school or the high school?
Right.
And, okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. That comment about some middle schoolers not quite being ready for the next grade, et cetera, is across the board. A lot of times, in fact, one of my smartest kids who has a scholarship, he's in his 4th year at UNL, says, looking back, he wouldn't have gone his freshman year. He was not ready for it. It's a little bit too much of a push. He's actually one that realized he needed a different phone, no apps, none of that tech. That's exceptional, though. Most students do not think like that. I need to get rid of the phone. So I'm glad we've come up with something else. My question, you said something about a refocus room. What does that look like?
Rolling that one? Sure.
Either one.
So part of the things that we've been learning about the Discovery program is the refocus room is something when the student is struggling or off track in class. But it has helped them, give them the time and support to come up with their own solution. And so it is guided, and it really does take the place of a traditional in-school suspension.
Okay.
So it is saying we're taking a break from the academic right now because this behavior isn't working, it's interrupting, and we need to deal with this behavior first before we can move to that. And the student moves on from that when they're ready. They said when we were touring, the longest a student ever took in there was 3 days to really wrap their minds around what their behavior was and what they needed to do to come up with a solution. But it's important that it is a solution that the student discovers for themselves and that they think through what's happening in order for them to actually be successful at doing it, that it isn't something that's just provided to them by adults, like you should do this, because many times when they're in trouble, they're not that interested in my ideas.
Right. So is there like, maybe not you, but a teacher, counselor, or something walking through them? Maybe they just need to be quiet for a little while, whatever.
Yeah.
That sounds like a solution to, I always said the punishment needs to fit the crime in a way. And that sounds like if they can come up with their own solution to correct the behavior, understand it, that is so much better than just in-school suspension, go do some homework, be by yourself. So that's good to hear.
I think it's very clear that we, no matter where kids are in the system, we do not fix kids. Kids have to learn and grow and figure things out. So just by going to high school prep or Eagles Path, that's not the end all be all. It's like, oh, great, things are all wonderful. The kids still have challenges. So the refocus room gives us an opportunity. And this is one of those things where the no dead ends. How do we keep supporting kids at every opportunity that presents itself? And that was a message we heard loud and clear on our site visits. And, and that's been a big discussion point. How do we do that? And the refocus area is one that we've seen and when we think we can start with.
Thank you.
Superintendent Swagger, thank you, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Just gonna ask a couple questions that I think may come up, and if they ask me, I won't know the answers. Middle schoolers who go here, what about activities?
They still could participate, just like with Eagles Path, they could participate at their home attendance center. Given that they meet the attendance and grade criteria and all of that. So as long as they're prepared that way. they
Okay.
can participate.
And my second question would be, what if a seventh grader comes, is very successful throughout seventh grade, and they and their parents want to try middle school again?
I think that is something we are very open to.
Thank you.
All right, so when we get to the how, there are certain elements of implementation that we need to look at. Of course, with any program, it takes staff. And we look at 8 certified staff to fully run the middle level high school prep program. And a lot of that comes with core teachers. To do the discovery program, we do need 2 teachers, and one is predominantly working with the middle level. One is predominantly working with the high school level. It includes a counselor, special education. So it does take staff resources to do this. And we're very aware of the challenges with staffing. The second part is training. We have a plan in place to train all our staff, and that would take place, the way we have it set up is in July. So the people who've been running programs in schools and have developed the program over the years, we're working with them to come in July and train all our staff. So that's the first part. The second part would be continual training. How do we make sure anybody new into the program has the opportunity to do the discovery training? So that's super important. We know that we have some facility things we have to look at. What does it look like bringing a high school prep program into RCAA? So just some things that we need to look at, and how does that actually play out? And we've talked about transition and refocus already. So just some things on the implementation side that we're working on.
I'm gonna preface by saying this might be a loaded question, and I'm sorry. I just know a lot of people have asked me, is if in a summary, could you say the biggest or highlight the differences between RCAA and this plan and what Rapid City High looked like before? Recognizing that's like a really big question.
Well, not having a ton of experience with Rapid City High, the first thing I would say is that was a designated school. These are programs. And as programs, we're taking from the comprehensive high schools and our middle schools to come together in a unique, distinct way. And as we've tried to illustrate the distinct or uniqueness of these programs, so that it's not just, oh, you're just going to go somewhere else and get the same thing. We need to do something different. I don't know how different Rapid City High was, and maybe.
So I would say a primary difference is we were not taking students into Rapid City High and teaching them how to do school differently. We were taking them into Rapid City High and trying to do school the same and get a different result using smaller classes or other things. This is, we're learning a program that we're going to implement with kids. We're going to teach kids this program. It's going to teach them how to do school and be successful. And we're going to literally pause their academics for 9 weeks, and we're going to say, we're going to reset here. We're going to learn how do we keep track of our schoolwork? How do we get organized? How do you do homework? How are you respectful? How do you handle conflict? All of the things that we know that kids struggle with when they're not being successful. A lot of that is the behavior piece. A lot of that is, I don't want to go to school. I don't know any, we hear this from kids. I don't know how to do math. I don't want to go to math. Because I'm picking on Michael there. So this is different because it is not saying, we're gonna put you in to this different spot and all of a sudden, everything that's wrong in your world is gonna be right. We are saying we're gonna put you in this different spot and we're going to teach you how we can help you make everything in your world better.
Before I
Yes.
call Ms. Stevenson, Ms. Roberts, can you give input? You probably be the expert on this question, so.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that, sorry, I always forget. One of the things I would say is that, we've tried numerous things, like we've got the advisory program and there's a lot of things, smaller class sizes, just fewer students, they get more attention. We do work to teach what they're doing in a different way. But on the other hand, it is very much exactly the same. And we don't feel like it is different enough, and we don't feel that it's giving those at-risk students some of those skills that they are still missing. We see students come around. We see, we'll talk about them. We're like, oh my gosh, remember last year? Like they've come so far. We've seen so much progress. But I do think we'll be able to reach more students and that we'll be able to do it more quickly. So some of the students that we just never get to, I think we can do more to reach them. And I don't think that it will take as long. And so that's part of why I'm just really excited about it.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yeah, two questions, a follow-up to that. So they do the discovery curriculum, and then is it kind of embedded in, is that
Yes.
what's different? That
Yeah,
it's embedded in the.
It is,
every
it's
other class
embedded in
is-
it, and that's why everybody's training, and we say everybody, we're talking clerical, security. We need everyone to be on the same page and to have a really good understanding of it so that we can be that. And we can make sure that we have it, throughout. And so we're all doing it at first. And we talked about it, Dr. Strasser was saying that the discovery teachers, one would be primarily middle school and one would be primarily high school. But my plan is to actually have them split back and forth. So if a student wasn't successful in their first 9 weeks with it and they're trying it again, they're doing it with a different teacher. So maybe, it's that was it. So they're getting a fresh look at it, but with somebody new.
Okay, and then my other question is, these staff numbers, 8 certified, 3 classified, how many students are we talking about? And how does that compare to Rapid City High School?
There will be fewer students than Rapid City High School. There really are going to be 3 core teachers. There will be 1 math teacher and 1 science teacher and 1 English teacher. And the kind of in there, they're also teaching social studies, 1 special education teacher. And then we're using the Eagles Path staff for art and computers and PE and some of the little CTE pieces that middle schoolers get exposure to while they're in middle school. Then 2 of the staff positions are discovery, one of them serving middle school and high school and flipping back and forth. And then the other one is a school counselor for that program to really give them that support. So we're not talking a huge amount of students at a time, because you can see with those teachers and having those smaller cohorts, we're looking at taking in the cohorts of 15 to 18 students. They were saying those are the most successful size of, what they're doing. And we'll see how this first year goes. We certainly don't want to bite off a lot more than we can chew. This is a lot already. And we really want to try to figure out how to do it well and then see what we might be able to do from there.
And I would say our intention at the middle level high school prep program would be to start the year with 2 cohorts and then build from there.
1 middle school, 1 high school cohort.
Two middle school to start the year. So we know that it will change as we go through and people start to get more familiar with the program. But to do it right, this is what we came up with,
So would you start another cohort second quarter?
potentially. It depends on the need. And I would say we would be closer to the semester time when we would start another one, but again, we're learning as we go. I would anticipate, and I know it's gonna be smaller than Rapid City High School, but you know, we also adjusted our staffing according to the current numbers that we have. So that was a change there, and we know that, or we believe this is what it takes to have success here. There really isn't changes staffing wise on the Eagles Path end, other than the one discovery teacher that works primarily with the high school program.
We would have, at the high school level, we would be doing discovery with everyone in the first quarter. Because we're looking at all the students that are staying with it with us. Of course, we're looking at any student that it would impact on-time graduation. So with that credit and a half of electives, we'll definitely consider that. We would not be delaying anyone's graduation for this. And so we'll work through it as we go into that. But we are looking at spending the first quarter doing that for everyone. So that's where we're seeing 2 middle school cohorts. Because pretty much everybody else at the high school, we're all in, we're doing it. I have plans.
So right now, it's anywhere from 60 to 70 students at that building next year.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but I wanna understand this. So we have 500 at-risk middle schoolers. Lord knows how many high schoolers, 600, 700 at-risk high schoolers who fit the definition. This program, if it is the idea, just to be clear, that they go back, like that they spend a year in this program and then go back to their middle school, spend a year here and then go back to Stevens.
So, yeah, so if a student goes through a year, we don't want to get into in and out during the year. But if a student has success, like at the end of 7th grade, we would have that flexibility to work with them and move back to the middle school. After 8th grade, they're all going to the comprehensive high schools. So they're gonna be there, and then as the year goes along, they would have the opportunity based on you know, their at-risk criteria to pursue Eagles Path.
So one student though gets in 9th grade. Is the expectation, the standard that they would stay there through high school, I guess is what I'm asking, or is the expectation that they would try to go back?
We don't ever want to close the door on going back. I would, I'm gonna go on a limb and say that Jen would tell you the majority of kids choose to stay.
Okay.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
So once we see it, and part of that's belonging and familiarity and knowing they feel good in a place. And that's typically why they stay, because that success level is greater. So, but again, if a student wants to go back, I would fully encourage that. I think there's a lot of value in being in the comprehensive high schools. Like I think there's value in these programs.
Thanks.
Mr. Swan.
Thank you, President Carr. Just one question. I'm stuck on the 500 students as well. 500 students at risk. It appears that we are going to have a significant number of students involved. So if your population grows, is there any plans for a summer program or interim program through the Christmas break, anything like that?
Interesting. We have not talked about a summer program. So I think that's something that we could have a conversation about to see how that fits and how that would serve the needs of kids. I would love to say, yes, we're having so much success that, you know, we're doing well. And I don't know what the number is of success. I think the number of success is the kids that are having success. And as long as they're doing well and learning and growing, that's to me the bottom line. I know it's easy to fixate on the almost 500 who meet the criteria, but I think Mr. Stewart said it pretty well. There's always a story behind the data, the numbers. And not every kid who meets that criteria needs to be in an alternative option. I think it would be much less. I think our middle schools and our high schools are looking at many different ways in which to work with kids. We walk through the interventions as part of our RTI process, and that catches a lot of kids. And the more conversations I have with principals, we're starting to see, I think, some positive impacts on the things that they are doing. So maybe don't fixate as much on that, but I appreciate the suggestion, and I think that's something we'll look at.
One thing I would say with that number, which was, it makes my stomach hurt, but it was the students that had 2 or more markers, and we are looking at those 3 areas, and obviously we're concerned about them having 2, but that is they're at risk, and we're doing work with them and seeing what we need to do there, how we can support them. But that whole group is not that they have all 3 markers. We don't want to lose them, but that high number is just that they have 2 or more there. So not all of them have all.
Superintendent Swagger.
Also, I would say, we cannot forget that right now, Rapid City Academy supports our virtual program. So 70 students on top of whatever number they have are currently served by that staff. So we can't just fixate on the number of bodies in that, because that staff is also supporting our virtual program, which we do hope to grow and encourage homeschool families in our district to possibly give that a try. Also, if we remove and offer services at the RCAA for our 3-marker middle schoolers, it may free up services at those middle school buildings to allow us to better serve and help kids with 1 or 2 markers. Because in many buildings, the students with the most needs take up the most time. But if we're helping them at a different location, then we're going to have more time to help the students who are in the middle schools.
You can continue.
Okay, all right. So some of our next steps, I wanted to share this with you. For the academic side for Eagles Path, we do need to take the information that Ms. Roberts was talking about from a credit standpoint to the instructional council. So we've been working with Ms. Seals, and we'll be bringing that forward. Just some of the nitty-gritty stuff that gets in, and a lot of this does fall on Mrs. Roberts, and I know she's got plans and has started a lot of this, but development of program guides. We've had conversations, how are we going to communicate further with our principals and then families and students on, we need to identify and then have those conversations about the program, and if that's a good fit for them. We know that she'll have to figure out the scheduling and what that all looks like. Again, that's just getting down into the day-to-day operations. We have a team that is going to go do another site visit. This site visit goes to Fort Collins Centennial High School, and then to Vantage Point High School and Crossroads Middle School. That's in the Adams 12 district. Those 2 programs are highly respected, and usually when you go to alternative education conferences, they are there and sharing their model and their successes. And we were very impressed. And I do want to say, when we talk about this program, we see things that are 12 years down the road. We know day one is going to be a little bit harder, but the long range, what we want to get down the road is we want to be a high functioning program, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of diligence. And I feel like we've made some good steps that way. So it's important that our staff be able to go see quality programs, and that's going to come later this month. We've got a group that's going to go and do that. We know that Skyward, there's things you have to do on that end. So again, the nitty-gritty stuff, and then the continual training. And I mentioned that earlier, but we'll do the big training. It's a 4-day deal in July. and then continuing on, how do we, anybody new in the program over time, making sure we can get them accustomed and implemented into the Discovery program. So that's what our next steps look like. Questions?
Just a couple questions. So, and this is another one of there are some things, and I've said this before, that I ask mainly so they will be on the recording. So when other people ask me, I can say, actually go back and you'll hear the better explanation than mine. So for the Eagles Path, their diploma would still come from Stevens or Central, correct? Because it is not, the school does not stand alone. Okay.
Yes.
I thought that was correct, but wanted to clarify. And then how are we, so we said, families or administrators or teachers. So how is this information? And obviously, like, we're starting small. How is this communicated to families this first year? Like, is it a rollout? Is it those that are high risk? How does that process work?
I don't know if I have a specific answer for that. We do know we've had conversations with the middle school principals specifically about how we're moving forward. And we know that we're going to have more meetings. And that was my last communication with them was when we kind of get moving on our next steps, we will be talking to them about those, the criteria and identifying kids and developing a plan to communicate with them.
I think that it will be once we've got that criteria and they've kind of identified who we want to start with for those two cohorts. Then what we currently do at Eagles Path and Virtual High School is we have informational sessions. And I talk them through everything. And to give them handouts and we talk about it and that it is an option. If a family or a student, if they are opposed to it and they don't believe it's a good fit for them, then they are not forced to do that. Most of the time, in the informational sessions that I have for Virtual High School and that I have for Eagles Path, they're excited to try something new. They've been struggling and they're looking for an answer. They're looking for something that might help them. So it's very few times that I have those informational sessions that they don't want to. Sometimes they'll say, we'd like to think about it and get back to you. But that I anticipate it looking pretty close to that, where we have a meeting with both the student and a guardian or more, that they're all invited and welcome to that and to really learn about it and decide what they think is best for that student, for their family, for what they're picturing for their future. And then they make that informed decision after we share that information with them. But we'll do that after we have a pretty good idea that it's needed, and then we share that information. And I do sometimes group ones, and sometimes if they can't make that work, I do one-on-one. So I have them every quarter as the quarter's ending and as the next quarter starting. And it's at least a 3-week process of my life. And so I anticipate it would be looking back that with the middle school as well.
And I think some of that will be, what can we share with the middle level principals about that they can share out to families. So communications that way will be another option for us to start sharing what we're doing. So, and I should have added on the next steps, hiring teachers for this. So there's one more that sorry I didn't get on there. Any other questions on this part?
Before I call on you, Ms. Stephenson, I want to do something very difficult in the fact that we want to get as much information out as we can, but I also want to be mindful of our time. We still have another big section to get to. And Dr. Strasser and Ms. Roberts are totally available even after this study session to answer questions and to give board members all the information. But I do want to have a delicate balance of getting the information and trying to keep track on time. So are you done with your presentation, or no, you have more?
I have one more thing.
Okay, go ahead with that.
If that's all right.
No, your part is fine, so.
Yeah. So this is non-RCAA specific. I wanted you to know the things that we are doing to provide behavior support, because that was something that I heard from you all at our recent board meetings.
Mhm.
So if you look at what we have, We've got our behavior matrix that I think has helped us provide a lot of consistency in how we work with kids day to day. And in a district this large, that's super important. Mr. Stewart is kind of the gatekeeper of that and the communicator and problem solver in that area, but that's important. We're bringing in what's called responsibility centered discipline. We know we needed to address our high school to give them more skills to work with kids in the world of behaviors. And this is a program that some of our staff have seen at different conferences they've gone to. And it's, I think, going to be really exciting. We've seen, there's a team that's going to go to Aberdeen Central. They currently do this and they're really excited about seeing it in action there. But the philosophy behind it is it's not too different from Discovery. Similar concepts. I mean, we're talking about human development here. But it does fit well with how, and I look at it as in the moment of challenge and when a kid says, well, I don't want to do that, how do you respond? And it's helping our teachers learn skills to work with kids. And it's something we don't teach very often. So that's a very small snippet of what that is. I've been working with our ninth graders, our principals on how we improve our ninth grade and bringing just more focus to the culture and academic development there. We know we have our conscious discipline K-8 that's very embedded, and Mr. Stewart's been doing a lot of work with principals and schools there. We have a behavior refresh, and this is, I think, a really awesome thing to keep building capacity geared around conscious discipline. It's a 2-day conference in July. They recently booked Brian Mendler. If you've never heard of him, he's kind of an in-your-face, kind of at-risk presenter. I highly recommend you just YouTube him and see some of his stuff. And then I know Dr. Conroy is working on a Fresh Start program, helping kids coming out of JSC and Wellesley and coming back into either the comprehensive high school or an Eagles Path. So we have a lot of things going on, and I'm just going to leave it at that, so you have an overview. So,
Ms. Baker.
What was the guy's name again for behavior refresh?
Brian Mendler, Mendler.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Board members? Thank you so,
Thank you all.
Mr. Berkeley.
Thank you. I have one question, but it's like parts A through E, so I'll try to go fast. So just so I'm kind of understanding the overview of the program, let's say I'm like a 7th grader. I would come in and I would do 9 weeks of the Discovery program and then go back into like a normal schedule, except with Discovery built in. Okay, follow-up question to that then. What do we do about that quarter of missed math, science, social studies? How does that? Yeah.
I think part of our philosophy is they are at risk for a reason. And if we don't support them in ways where they can become more successful, learn how to be more successful in school, it doesn't matter how much math we teach them. So I think in the long run, we're going to gain more academic value by walking through the Discovery curriculum. So that's how I would look at it.
I agree. So will there be like a kind of modified curriculum, or will it just be like you missed quarter one? How do you get back in? How do you
that will be up to Mrs. Roberts and her team.
I think for the middle school, it will be kind of a pause. There is, like I said, all those communication skills. There's definitely writing, some things that are coming in there. They're a part of the Discovery part there is some arts. We know those are an important part of expression, and particularly those at-risk students, some PE. But there would be a pause for a little while on that. And then we would be getting them together and feeling like we could really move forward on the rest of their academics. I feel comfortable in doing that at the Eagles Path, and that we're picking up those pieces in other quarters, and we're doing that regularly. So for that reason, I feel comfortable with it, and that we can help our students still gain and make progress.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
and I absolutely agree that it's worth it to, you gotta learn how to learn before. I just didn't know how that was gonna look, cause I'd hate to see like the last quarter chopped off. Everyone chops off the last quarter. Please don't do
No,
that. That's when all the
no,
fun stuff is.
no.
That's what keeps kids enjoying math is quarter four. Okay, so then I would go through seventh grade for sure, and then maybe probably eighth grade, but kind of up to the
Right.
families and where
We
they're
we
at.
will, the assumption is that we go all the way through eighth grade. If it's a situation where a student does want to transition back, then we'll have that
And they
conversation.
might be coming in as an eighth grader.
And then eighth graders all go to ninth grade, and then maybe come back.
Correct.
And then same sort of thing, might come out,
Yeah.
might go in, but
But there's so
towards the
many
end of there.
opportunities at the comprehensive high schools. There's so many wonderful programs and groups and, you know, to find their friends and find their people and find the things they enjoy doing. That we do see a lot of value in giving that a try and kind of expanding. And we're hoping that, with the high school prep, we've gotten them ready for that. And that more of them will be successful than the ones that right now don't have the high school prep and go straight in, and
Mhm.
we're not seeing it go well.
I absolutely agree. Right. Getting them, not keeping them there forever is like a goal that I would have.
Right.
Cause one of my big worries, with some previous options that were discussed was that some kid's gonna be picked on in seventh grade and then stuck there for 7 through 12. So I appreciate all of these opportunities for reentry into the, I don't wanna call it, what do I wanna call it? Comprehensive, that's the word, comprehensive high schools. All right, I think that is all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Thank you so much
Yep,
for
thank you all.
this presentation. It's wonderful, and it's wonderful for me because it answers the question to the community, what are we doing about the learning gap, right? We're not just sitting on our hands, we're not just doing any, but you all are doing a lot of work to specifically, strategically address this issue. And as you said, again, to the community, we're starting the program, be patient with us, and we'll get there. So thank you all for all the hard work you're doing. All right, at this time, Mr. Sassy is coming and his team with the bond report. And did you hear did you hear Mrs. Gross's question about capital outlay?
I did not, sir.
I don't know how to read it.
I'm gonna summarize here. She
do that.
said that, historically, we have had to use capital outlay transfers in our district. And because bonds are the primary mechanism to build, the fact that we haven't passed a bond in 50 years and the fact that we have in fact needed capital outlay transfers may attribute to some of the information that we are going to hear tonight. And how should we move forward with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that a good enough summary of that?
Does everybody kind of have that general, yeah? Basically, how does capital outlay,
Yeah.
how it affects facilities and.
Certainly,
transfers?
but we're jumping right in the deep end. One of my favorite subjects. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really excellent question. And in large part, a significant part of the reason that we're here today having this conversation. And so I think it blends really well into this conversation, and certainly we'll get started. And then as we go through, if that theme doesn't come back the way it should, I would love to bore you all with a spiel about that towards the end, because it's certainly a passionate thing for me. So thank you, President Carr. Welcome to our mashup continuance conversation here of facilities. And this is going to be a bit of a mashup conversation. I think, obviously, as you are all very well aware at this point, our facility situation, and that question highlights this concept as well, is really complex. It is not simple by any stretch of the imagination. And so obviously it's very important not only to all of us as internal stakeholders of the district, but given the idea that it came up as its own pillar through the steering committee of the strategic plan, it's a big deal to the community as a whole and all of our external stakeholders. And so we're going to do our very best to blend together sort of a brief update regarding that facility pillar of the strategic plan. And then talk a little bit further about how a bond impacts the district's state of facilities, because those two things obviously are deeply intertwined. Whether we are ever successful in passing a bond or we are not, those things are deeply intertwined, and it's really important that you all understand what that means and how that impacts the facilities. And so ultimately, the meat of our conversation is really wanting to continue that discussion around bond priorities and start to really drill in on what the board thinks is ranking really high on that list. So obviously you all know Mr. Jade Clement. He'll handle a good portion of this conversation. And of course, Nicole, you please feel free to chime in at any point throughout our conversation. So we're not going to do the full deep dive into the pillar at this time. That'll come. We'll have an opportunity as we talk more about this strategic plan to deep dive you in that. But again, it's just important to understand how the district's facility situation is impacted both with and without a bond being passed. And again, primary goal is to deep dive into bond priorities. A few points before getting started as you hear this information and you're considering all the things you're going to hear. Any of the projects that you see specifically identified, especially those in regard to a bond, a potential bond, really are based upon conversations with you all as a Board of Education, internally amongst administration, and really around what we see as a team, an administrative team, as both the immediate and intermediate needs of the district. With that being said, of course, all those projects can change. And so part of the point of tonight is having a deep and robust conversation around what you all view as the priorities. I think what we would like to mention up front is there's really in our situation in related to Sarah's question, and I think this is where that situation starts to play deeply into where we're at in terms of facilities. She's exactly right. The bond is the primary mechanism for large scale building projects for districts in the state of South Dakota. And really what has happened in our district's unique situation is because we haven't passed a bond in so long, we've leaned almost exclusively, especially over the last 50 years, on our internal capital outlay resources. And that's created a snowball effect where, and then of course, another great point where the district has from time to time borrowed from capital outlay to inject into the general fund to support the general fund. That removes the amount of resources being injected into facilities, preventative maintenance, upgrades, renovations, expansion, all those things. And so it's really put our district into a snowball situation where those needs continue to mount and we just do not have the resources available internally to address all those, and we continue to fall farther and farther behind. So some of the high impact factors playing into this situation, the information that you're going to see tonight are number one, capacity replacement at elementary. Of course, as Canyon Lake closes and those students are flowed out into current facilities, that has an impact on total capacity. I don't believe it's a secret that there are multiple elementary facilities that at this point have outlived their useful life. And at some point, we as a district have to determine how we're going to address those buildings. Of course, relieving pressure at high capacity schools. We have several schools, Jade's going to talk about this more in his portion, that are nearing capacity levels. And obviously that is a concern. And so relieving that pressure is one of those high impact factors. A growing and shifting community. and I want to be really clear about this. I think that this is something that the messaging around this needs to be very, very clear. Our community is certainly growing. It is undeniable that our community is growing. I saw last week or the week before that once again, the city broke its own record for building permits issued and the total dollar amount of building permits issued again for, I believe, the 4th consecutive year. So our city is growing. Now, we have not seen that reflected in our enrollment. That is also a fact, and we understand that as well. And if you recall back to the October study session, one of the concepts that Nicole and I both talked about was not building bigger, but building better. And we are in a situation where we need to address the major factors that we're going to see impacting the district in the immediate and intermediate future. Hopefully, at some point, we will be able to put the district in a position where it can look much further out down the road and start planning further out down the road. But we are just not there. And so I want to be clear about what we're saying when we say a growing community. Our community is growing. There's no doubt about that. We are not seeing that reflected in our enrollment at this time. A shifting community is just as great of a concern as we see the community shift in terms of the major residential areas and some of those things happening. Obviously, we need to be able to respond to that as a district in a way that makes sense. And so as our community shifts and grows, and we're going to talk quite a lot about that tonight, we need to be ready and poised to respond to that. And then lastly, high priority renovations that help address equitable facility conditions. So obviously, when you look at the state of our facilities from age built and all those different things, it can look very, very different from one location to the next in terms of the overall facility conditions and learning environment. And so high priority renovations that would help to address those conditions. Obviously, the big picture goal is addressing the pressing needs and positioning the district strategically as we move into the future. Lastly, the facility pillar, just to talk very briefly about this and in a setup on some of the information you're going to hear next. The facility pillar is set around 2 ideas. The first being safe, modern, and effective learning environments. And I really want to commend Jade and Kathy and the facilities committee. They've done a tremendous amount of work in really digging into the facilities and really trying to understand the situation that we have on our hands. And it's been really fruitful. I think some of the information Jade is going to show you tonight really demonstrates how fruitful that work has been. But part of what we really tried to dig into around that portion of the pillar was what does that mean? What does it mean to have a safe, modern, and effective learning environment? And what are the criteria and measurements that we can look at to determine what that means and how we move our schools towards that safe, modern, and effective learning environment? And then the second portion being building and maintaining facilities to meet changing educational needs. And where we really focused attention there was the development of a 10-year facility plan. And that comment, the last time I made it, there were some additional community comments about that. And I want to be clear that the district has a really solid understanding of where its facilities are. But because of the nature of our situation and our revenue streams, primarily capital outlay, it is very difficult to be able to sit down and plot out what a facility plan is going to look like over an extended range of time. Because oftentimes we just don't know what our resource situation is going to look like. And so it's not that we don't know what's happening in our facilities. It's that truly sitting down and trying to dial in a 10-year facility plan is much more complex than it would seem on the surface. And so we put a lot of work into that. and that plan is going to be based around what the district can achieve with its internal resources. Now, this gets a bit complex because we also feel like it's essential to understand how a bond impacts that facility situation. And Jade's going to demonstrate that, and I think that you'll find that really powerful. But those are really the major ideas that facility pillar is built around. So with that set up, I'm going to kick it over to Mr. Clement. Let me pause for just a minute. Nicole, any comments that you have up to that point?
No, Coy, I think you did a great job.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Clapham has a question.
Oh, sorry. Sure.
Would it be accurate, and again, just make sure when talking about like planning and using our resources, is it accurate to say even like previous boards and administrations, things like property purchases at the price that they were now, like that there have been things that have been done to be responsible with what we have, and I think we really need to emphasize sometimes it's, oh, you're just asking for a bond because you haven't, but there has been preparation for years, doing things like purchasing, doing things like, you know, at my kid's school, the mold abatement that had to be done at Blackhawk. And that many of those things have been done with the resources we have, and it may not be obvious because we haven't built on the property, we haven't, but that has occurred.
I could not agree with you more. I would love to take all the credit for this, but I've only been here 5 years, of course. So I think there was a bit of a narrative built during the last bond that because of the district's facility situation, that the district had somehow been irresponsible with its resources, had not invested well, et cetera. I would completely disagree with that. I think both from an external perspective and now from my perspective internally, I think the district has been unbelievably resourceful and responsible when it came to the investment of those funds, how the district has used debt over time. Obviously, that's a major part of this conversation. I won't deep dive on that, I promise. But I think that again, I would argue the exact opposite of that. I think the only way that the district has held this together over time has been the board and the administration being extremely responsible and resourceful. So I completely agree. Mr. Clement, please. Do you want to switch? Or do you want to change? Oh, I'm sorry, Mike.
All right. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start by touching on building capacity. I won't go into this too much, but one of the things that we had to look at was building capacity. So the old building capacities was calculated back in, I think, 2008. So the facility uses have changed since then quite a bit. So we took some time and recalculated some of those, and some of the considerations during that calculation was the number of classrooms, square footage of those classrooms, how many kids can we fit in there, and the use of that room. So we were able to calculate a maximum capacity, which is that second column there. Something that we need to think about too is the utilization rate. We don't have students in the classrooms all day, all the time. So for example, elementary schools we can assume are about 90% utilized. So 90% of the time elementary school kids are in the classroom. That other 10%, they're at lunch or recess or it's planning time, whatever it may be. And that same idea can be extended to the middle school and high school levels. So we use that utilization rate to calculate a functional capacity. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to shoot for populating our schools to the functional capacity, but we can't extend into the maximum capacity range. So just as an example, Blackhawk has a maximum capacity of 466 students. With a 90% utilization rate, that comes out to 419 students that we can comfortably fit in that school. I don't show it on this table, but overall our elementary school capacity is at about 93% for this school year, which includes Canyon Lake. So that's just something that we need to think about moving forward. But I will circle back to capacity here at the end. It comes full circle. One of the things that Coy talked about was establishing standards within the building. This is part of our facilities pillar. So what we did was we took some of the key points, which is safety and security, modern HVAC and electrical, aesthetic improvements, and establishing an effective learning environment. We created some sub-points to that, things that weighed into that the most. We essentially gave each one of them a weight, and for every single school, we scored them in order to create, I guess, a good way of stacking all the schools against each other as far as facilities goes. So I won't bore you with all the scoring, but I can give you the results that we got as far as where we sit currently. So we spaced things out into 3 different groups. So 75 and above, generally those schools do meet the district standards that we've established. There's usually 1 or 2 items that are dragging those down, but nothing in general are major there. Below 75 and above 40, these are kind of the middle of the road ones that are multiple items that can be improved, but for the most part, they do meet district standards. And then 40 and under, there's multiple conditions or multiple conditions that bring that score down and generally do not meet district standards. That doesn't mean they don't have there's not a one-off situation where they do meet them, but for the most part, with a maximum score of 100, they do not hit that criteria. As far as what we can do with that information, we can really do a lot of planning. We can use that to help us identify upgrade considerations. We can determine focal points for preventative maintenance, anticipate major expenditures in the future, establish standards for the buildings, and really give us a starting point so we can plan for the future. Which kind of leads into the next thing here, which we've started to do. So what you're looking at here, the column on the left is where we currently sit. So the list that you just saw. The one on the right is kind of a 10-year plan that we put together without considering a bond. So over the next 10 years, using capital funds, also knowing, at least having an idea when we're going to have funds available to us for major projects in the future, we're able to anticipate, you know, what can we do in the next 10 years. So that would bring our average from 54 to 65 over a 10-year period.
Excuse me 1 second, Jade, just a couple highlight points to make on top of this. So again, this plan was developed with the idea that we would only be using district internal resources to address the major facility needs we have. And obviously, we do see some movement and we achieve some good things. I want to point out that a major component in consideration of this plan is that, as you're all aware, you've heard me talk about several times, currently the district is highly leveraged in terms of debt. So there was several debt issues to take care of big picture projects in the district, which were necessary. However, that takes resources again from capital outlay because we're using capital outlay funds to service that debt. As we look out into the remainder of this decade, we start to see a major drop off in yearly debt service, about that 28 range. We have a step in 28, we have a step in 29, and then in 30, we are 2030, excuse me, we are essentially debt free at that point. And so there would be then the ability to come back and utilize debt and leverage debt to be able to, again, look at some fairly significant building projects. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that is a major component of how this situation looks as we move into the rest of the decade and beyond, and certainly as we consider a bond in what some of those other pressing needs are beyond that initial bond point. So wanted to mention that.
Oh, Mr. Berkline.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Question quick. Can you tell me more about why something like, you see South Canyon jumping way up and Pinedale jumping, Pinedale stays down there. Another one, Horseman jumping way up. What about those schools? I guess, why do those ones move and something like a Robbinsdale does not in the 10-year plan?
Well, I think I guess the whole goal behind making this 10-year plan was we use the first column of that to identify, we have all these schools in the red, how can we get them at least into the yellow? So some of them, it's as simple as, addressing a very focused issue, whether that be HVAC improvements or something like that. And then in the case of South Canyon and South Park, it's much bigger, and we have to look at much bigger projects for that. So that would kind of fall back on the question of when are we going to have funds available to us to take on larger projects like that. So those are more or less just the ones that rose to the top. Again, this is taking bond totally out of the equation.
So some of that has to do with feasibility too, like South Canyon.
Yes, yeah.
As a building is younger slightly. I mean, they're all 50 years old, but it's slightly younger than like a Wilson.
Yes.
And those, the where it's sitting, all
Yes.
those things are reasons.
Yep, cool. Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
And I'd just like to make the comment and highlight to the community, we got had a lot of conversation about the Canyon Lake closure, but I'd like the community to see that there are other buildings that are right behind Canyon Lake. And so I know during that conversation, some people were feeling like we were picking on them and they, why them? Well, it's other buildings too. And these communities and these areas, I mean, we're gonna have to have the same tough conversations about Pinedale, Meadowbrook, Robbinsdale, and Wilson that we had on Canyon Lake. And I like this because it causes us to focus that the problem's not over. We still have a lot of work to do when it comes to facilities. So thank you for this.
Totally agree.
Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. This is pretty much an overview, and the amount of things going into those scores is a huge spreadsheet. And I think you were there that day, Walt, and then and we saw it too in our facilities committee. I would encourage board members to go into the office to take a look at it. It's more than just so that you have that background knowledge. Not all of that can be, it's a large amount that would not do the public well. I mean, people know that there's a crack in Robbinsdale, and it goes by like detailed. It was very detailed. It's really excellently done. So I guess I would encourage each of you to go in and take a look and just have a conversation with Jade to look at those points. It makes so much more sense as to why some go up. And of course, again, it's not having a bond.
And I think you make an excellent point, Mr. Berkland, that there's nuance to this in terms of project selection, project timing, all those different things. And so again, as we move pieces and as we continue to dial in these different situations, that could change and look different, obviously. But movement of any given variable obviously has a major impact on all the other pieces of the situation. So it's a great catch.
Good. Ms. Stephenson.
are you gonna give us an overview of that 10-year plan? Is that tonight?
Yeah, we will. No, that is not tonight. So that really is pillar specific, Christine. And so at this point, we didn't want to deep dive. It felt like the need from the board was really more around pushing into the bond conversation. But again, I think understanding that the tie between those two things. And Jay does have a slide coming up in which he's gonna talk more about, as you inject a bond into that situation, how that changes it too. But that was not the intention of tonight. Of course, as we finalize the strategic plan and bring that to the board for consideration, we'll certainly talk more about what that's gonna look like.
Yeah, and I hope we can have a discussion about a 10-year plan without a bond that is public, or that the public can listen to.
Yeah.
So that we can, so that as we go forward asking for a bond, we and the public can have a discussion about what it looks like without it,
Yeah.
like what the choice people are actually making.
Agreed. Well said.
So in order to create a 10-year plan with a bond, we had to make up a bond, basically. So just kind of using some conversations that have happened in the past, as well as injecting some of, you know, the needs that we identify, we kind of made up a bond. Quick disclaimer, these are all rough estimates based off square footages. Square footages doesn't include anything like if we need to purchase more land, if necessary, any design inclusions, special circumstances, anything like that. So, and additionally, these prices are, I made my best efforts to forecast what construction is going to cost in the next 5 years. I have no idea if that's right. I don't know if I could guess how much construction is going to cost in the next 5 weeks. So, this is my best guess. So what we did was, we added a new school at Shepherd Hills with 650 student capacity, and then 2 additions, or an addition at South Park with major renovation on the interior existing portion, and then a 200 student addition at Grandview with a major renovation on the interior portion of that. So again, just an example.
And for clarity, just for the public, Shepherd Hills is,
Shepherd Hills, behind the area behind Nards.
okay.
So this slide is very much like 2 slides before. So the first column there is where we currently sit. The second one is a 10-year plan, and the third is the 10-year plan with that bond example. So it's pretty clear. Obviously, there's 1 extra school in there, so the column is one item longer, but it's pretty clear that it brings a lot of schools into the green. I think it's 16 schools into the green or something like that. So it's a huge, huge improvement. It also brings our average from 54 to 76 overall. It just leaves Wilson, Robbinsdale in the red. And really closes the gap on all those other schools, makes it a whole lot easier for us to bring all of those up into the green. And then once everything's in the green, then we can talk about redoing the scale and in a way that I guess works better with more modern facilities across the district.
Great points, Shade. Well said. So I'm gonna try to make this concept make sense outside of my mind the way it does inside of my mind. So please hang with me. I often think of our facility right now as this cyclical situation, cyclical process. And because of all these unique factors that have impacted the district over time, that process is very long. It's this very long cycle where we're struggling meeting preventive maintenance needs, obviously struggling to renovate, expand, all those different things. And so this cycle is just life cycle, so to speak, of facilities is very, very long and round. And I think what is impactful to me as I look at this slide is with this type of a situation, and as you can see, injecting a bond into the mix, we take this leap in terms of life cycle. So it makes sense in my mind that we take that life cycle from a shape like this down to a shape like this, where we're catching up facilities at a faster rate. As Jade said, we put even the facilities in yellow at much greater striking distance of us putting them into the green. We free up resources for the ability to move them into preventive maintenance and all those those general building issues that capital outlay really should be responsible for, not necessarily building new buildings. And again, on the back of this, we have a good deal of debt coming off the books and the ability to service more debt to follow up with additional projects. So I think it does, it makes a huge leap in terms of our ability to improve our facility situation at a quicker rate.
Okay, so just some stuff to think about when discussing locations for bond. This is where the capacity portion comes into play. We're not in a position to shift large amounts of capacity throughout the district at this time. So if we're talking about locations to add on and renovate, we need to be thinking about locations that where we can build without impacting learning, where we can keep students in the classroom and we just have a construction fence blocking half the playground for a year and a half or something like that. We have a bunch of schools in the district that really have large plots of land that are good candidates for expansion. Grandview, Knollwood, Meadowbrook, Rapid Valley, South Canyon, and South Park all have large lot sizes and all score relatively low on the current list. There are some others that could be up for consideration too, but those are the ones that kind of rise to the top. When considering a new school location, and I know Coy kind of talked about it already, but being aware of where the city is growing, the Shepherd Hills area is growing very, very quickly. I think almost 75% of the building there has already been permitted out. So construction could start on a large portion of the area at any time, really. So that area is growing. We also need to think about the southeast side of town where we have the Lamb property over by Jolly Lane there. That area is growing as well. Just a couple things to consider. And then also, and President Carr, you brought this up, Robbinsdale and Wilson score very low on the list. And one thing that we need to be aware of there is that the cost to bring those up is incredibly high. So it kind of compounds that issue because they're occupying the same population base here in town. I mean, really, they're only a stone's throw away from each other. I mean, there's one school in between it, and that's South Park. So they're occupying kind of the same population base. So, I mean, if we have problems at one, we have problems at both of them. So.
So, board, we should pause there, in first take any questions that you have or anything, you want to discuss regarding the information you just saw. We have a few more slides, but really wanted this portion to be discussion on the board's behalf, your ability to ask us questions and pick our brains as you contemplate and talk about your priorities. So we'll pause there for that.
Ms. Stephenson.
I guess my main question is, why are Robbinsdale and Wilson still on the list on the 10-year with a bond?
Well, I'll jump on that first, and then Nicole, you can certainly add. So it's not a secret that in the previous bond, the plan called for those two facilities to be closed. And so essentially at that point in time, the district really stopped flowing resources in terms of large scale renovation, upkeep outside of what was necessary to keep the building operational. Because of course, it's not a good investment to put money into a building that is contemplated being closed. So obviously, the actual closure of those buildings would be a point that needs to be discussed and determined throughout this process. And that's going to be, of course, a large part of your thought and discussion in terms of laying out priorities. So we didn't really feel like we could pull them off there because obviously that is not the plan. And of course, we don't want to prematurely start panicking the community without having a solid plan in place. And obviously that starts with this discussion. So, Nicole?
I think we felt that it would be really presumptuous of us to think that we have the ability to say, board, these buildings are gone. We didn't ask you, we just took them off the list. That would be very unethical, I think, of us to make that decision, because we know that building closures are decided by the board. So that's a huge part of it. Also, if you go back, another one. Oh, the one that has the 10, the bond and the 10, that one. So if you look at this, I think it's super important to realize that even though the fictitious bond that Jade presented, even if that fictitious bond is passed, a lot of buildings that are not mentioned in the bond move up into green. Some of them move all the way up to 100%. Meadowbrook, North, West moves way up. Those are all things that we would finance internally, because we could do some other work with bond finances. So I think it's really important that our community realizes that anything that we put into a bond, we as a team really believe that these are priorities that the board and the district has talked about and agreed on, but that doesn't pause and stop everything else and allow all of capital outlay money to go to general fund. That is not at all what's happening. It allows us to then reorganize our capital outlay fund and make huge, significant changes in a lot of other buildings that were not mentioned. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's Mr. Berkland. Next, were you next? Okay, Mr. Berkland.
Cool, thank you. First off, thank you, Nicole, for that. I think that's a great thing to share with our community. As I know, one thing that I heard in the last bond was like, how does this affect me? My school is not on there. Why would I vote for this? But that does a great job of showing how it does. It does impact pretty much everywhere. So thank you for putting that together, and thank you for mentioning that. Speaking of the last bond, talking about your kind of made up bond there, looking at the old one, I see a new site in the southwest area, Parkview, which would be kind of covered by those expansions, and then Vicky Powers Park. I guess, has there been changes since then, or why? I mean, I know it's a fictitious bond, but what made you choose those ones for your fictitious bond over a Southwest or West or a Vicky Powers?
So, again, I think we do not have the luxury at this point in time to be able to look past really the immediate and intermediate needs. When you look at our community, the most aggressive growth and the areas that are really poised to move right now are really throughout the east and southeast corridor of our community. You heard Jade say, and I might butcher this, but I'll reiterate it. So Jade talked with the company developing the area around Shepherd Hills, and 75% of the area of the buildable area in that section of land is already permitted, meaning that they could start building anytime they want. So as soon as developer resources are lined up, they're going. They're putting shovels in dirt. I drive through that area every single day, and it is unbelievable the expansion that is happening there. And so I think, you know, for us, in trying to think about, again, those high impact factors that we're seeing, looking at addressing that portion of our community, in relieving some of the pressure that we're seeing at Valley View and that we're seeing at Rapid Valley is a concern that rises high to the top. Now, you know, you could do that with multiple locations, but Shepherd Hills is a location that is really prime to be able to build on. Also, there's enough land and it's in a great space that at some point down the road, it could be expanded into an elementary middle type complex, similar to Valley View, East Middle. But those are things that are happening right now. Now, there are other portions of the community that are also poised to grow, but from the information we're getting and the feedback we're hearing, it's not in the same way that east and southeast corridor is. And then I should add, just while I'm thinking about it, I think the inclusion of a South Park Grandview addition and renovation and really again looking at replacing capacity and the ability to relieve pressure with the strategic location of those facilities and facilities being poised to expand and that are good candidates to renovate. Again, it allows the district to start moving capacity and relieving pressure in strategic areas of the district. And this is just, again, really addressing what we feel are like immediate needs at this point, so.
So I had dinner last night with a gentleman who paints, and he has booked 80 houses in the area we're talking about that will be built within the next 12 months. He has been contracted to paint them. So like Jade said, we know those houses are going up. That is the issue with being a school district trying to predict growth, because where we would have predicted in 2020 is very different than where we know growth is happening in 2024. I think it's important to realize also that that area east of the interstate, so the mall area and behind, could access the Shepherd Hills pretty easily through the interstate, whereas it would be more challenging to get other parts of town out to Vicky Powers because of the Fifth Street as it expands out that way. Haynes is not built for the capacity of travel that we would necessarily have if we built where they're expanding now. So just it's such a good question, because what were we thinking 4 years ago? Well, we were thinking with our best information. That's always going to be how it is. 4 years from now, somebody could say, what were you thinking? But we know that's going to be the growth out that direction. We also have to look at the B29 is coming in. Box Elder does not have the capacity to house all of the people coming in. We know historically, and talking to Ellsworth Air Force Base, and I have been having some conversations about our military students with them. We are currently sitting at 539 active military students who have active military parents. But many military parents want to live with close access to the base, so that growth is going to impact them. We also know that the Piedmont Valley, the Somerset area, quick access to the interstate also appeals to a lot of moves. And the South Park and the Grandview, these are tough conversations, but we know information about Robbinsdale that concerns us as a district. And that is a large population of kids that we need to look at being able to house. So we're trying to be financially responsible here because we are only building one new school. We could be asking for multiple new schools, but we're saying that we can renovate South Park and Grandview for close to the cost of building one new school. So we are building for future capacity and need where growth is happening, but we're also renovating for current capacity needs. And that is super essential in this conversation.
I agree. As all of you've noted, there's no way that we could know for sure. So I'm not saying this bond's bad, that bond's bad, not at all saying that. I'm kind of relating to that. we're not gonna have a perfect plan, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect that. But kind of related to that, I do just want to throw in there, this plan here costs 125 million for one school. The previous bond was 190 million for 4 schools. And so I just want to really emphasize how fast this is changing, and if we don't have time to try to make a perfect plan for that. And then the last comment I just wanted to add in was, I know that we had talked about AC, HVAC, that sort of thing. I think it was like 15 million-ish, is that right? You can give me the real number later, but I personally think that that is also an important part to include in there. I think that's something that would get a lot of the community behind this. It's something that's very, what's the word I'm looking for?
So can I make one quick comment? Just because you talked about a finance concept, and obviously that's my nerd out area. So you are 1,000,000% right, Mr. Berkland. And one of the factors that we talked about at length in the last bond was how perfect of a time that was in terms of borrowing money, in terms of interest payback, in terms of ability to make our taxpayer dollar stretch. We did not take any of that lightly. And I would say that everything we said throughout that process has come true. And if you recall from the October study session, I gave you an example that I believe it was right around $125 million in the current rate environment versus what we were looking at in the last bond. In the total interest payback, even though we would be borrowing about 70 million less dollars, was about even with the current rate environment. So I think that sometimes, and I understand that sometimes I get in too far into the financial aspect and don't think as a human, but I do think sometimes that is an overlooked, really significant factor in these conversations that if we don't address these issues and we continue to allow them to linger into the future, at some point, not saying that's going to be tomorrow or 5 years from now, at some point, they will cost our taxpayer more money and we will get less building for what it costs them at that point. And that's really a huge factor in this. So thank you for bringing it up.
And one thing I will add to that, so that sample bond plan, what it really does is goes back to the idea that Coy talked about is, we're able to relieve pressure from our internal funds and we can divert those funds to things like HVAC upgrades. And that's exactly what I did to help bring some of those lower ranked schools up, because on the overall scoring, I think air conditioning accounts for like 25 points out of the 100. So it's a significant impact, and we're able to focus a little more on that when we have some of our big fish kind of separate, I guess.
Mr.
I was gonna add, and whether that's actually in there or just something that the message like, hey, if we spend this, then I just feel like HVAC is, especially in August, it's something that we can really feel and see, whereas in addition to South Park, it might not be felt the same way.
Of course.
Thank you. Mr. Swan.
Thank you, President Carr. I would like to thank you for not closing a school, fictitiously or not. That usually starts a really good conversation in my part of town anyway. So thank you for that consideration. But if there is a decision to close a school, if there is something like that, this is just from the Canyon Lake closure and going to the meetings and listening to all of that. We do have a lot of, I guess, we got to have a lot of communication. And I appreciate this that, President Carr had started this conversation. I guess the whole board had started this conversation some months ago. So we were transparent. We let everybody know that this was going to become a conversation. So it's not springing anything on anybody, so I appreciate that as well. One of the things that I would like to say is that I've heard it before and I wanted to kind of bring it up, is that it's a time where you're talking about our district's buildings are 50 years old. This is updating our capacity as well, as Jamie so eloquently pointed out, there wasn't an internet when when this was built, you know, when we walk through, south, there you could see all the technology, how it was laid out into the trays and how it was built for tomorrow's use. So I appreciate that. One of the things that I got a question on is about is there anything for like a catastrophic fund? You know, if something were to happen happen at Robbinsdale, would we be able to close and move the kids somewhere? Is there a catastrophic, I mean, so it just becomes unsafe that we don't feel good about sending kids there. Is there something of a catastrophic fund that we look at that, so that if we have to make catastrophic repairs to, say, an HVAC, and it's gonna cost us a lot of money, I would just hate to see that, you know, all the good planning not go to waste, you know what I mean? That we start over, reprioritizing, doing all of that, so that sort of planning has to come. One of the other thing though is, we did talk about this as well, and I'm glad you brought up the numbers between the two different potential bonds, I guess, is the first bond being that refinance, as we spoke before, is always an option. If interest rates were to get better, things like that's always an option. That's always on the play, always on. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of bring those up because those we brought up in committee before. So I'm happy to be having this conversation. And I'm glad to see that, you know, there is some forward thought of saying, you know, hey, we're visiting with contractors, we're visiting with the community, we're involving the community. And I think this is how good decisions are made. So thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, sir.
I guess to your point, about emergency capacity. So in recalculating the building capacities, we do have room to absorb some students if we need to. That would require some shifting within the building administration internally. I mean, there's a lot of schools where we have classrooms dedicated to learning centers or whatever else, where if we absolutely had to absorb an entire classroom or an entire school, we could shift some people around and make it happen. Is that ideal? No, but we have the option if we need to.
It's a great point, Jade. One other point to what you said, Mr. Swan, which is all excellent points. We do have a portion of our property insurance that is geared towards catastrophic failure of major systems in buildings. So if we were not in a situation in which we had a solid plan in place to close a building and there was a catastrophic failure of one of the major operating systems, we would have some insurance coverage for that as well. So, that's always helpful in those situations, but again, not ideal, like Jade said.
Those conversations aren't fun. And if you can look at communities in our state that have faced that, Castlewood and the tornado, and how they have had to bring in basically, the train, they've brought in train cars and they're using them for things, and they brought in the camp trailers and they're using those for kitchens, and every school district rises to that because we're gonna absolutely educate the kids, but the whole community in that situation had to come together, and that would be the need we would have here as well. We'd probably set up temporary classrooms on properties on land that we have now that is not being used, but historically, these temporary sites in Rapid City have become permanent, these annexes, and they are not what is best for kids. And so I think moving forward in the future, we just have to remember that when something is supposed to be temporary, we need to make sure that it is temporary and doesn't become a permanent expectation of how we conduct school at those sites. But we would absolutely step up and make it work. Every kid would have a classroom.
So I wanted to,
Were you done?
I wanted to kind of point out one thing and then sort of open a question that I would like to know what board members think. One, is to the community. If we passed a bond tomorrow, ground won't break for like a year. So that's the other thing when we talk about urgency, and I don't mean to be melodramatic, but at the same time, when we talk about this, we're talking about 3, 4, 5, like, none of us might be sitting in these seats by the time that that happens. So that's part of the urgency, like, this isn't like, oh, I mean, even if you build a home, which is quite different than a school, but you know, it's not like you snap your fingers and it appears. So I think that that's part of the urgency as well, is that, you know, if the bond had been passed in 2020, like, the building probably would have just opened at this point. So I think we need to think that. My other question kind of to the board, I guess 2 questions. One, initially, if you look back at the needs of the bond, West was basically next on the list. And I know that elementary schools are priority. Do we have any sort of appetite for looking at West as a additions upgrade? One question. The other question is, what do people generally think when we're talking about an amount of a bond? Do people have a thing they have in their head that they feel comfortable with? I would love to hear my colleagues' opinions on the matter.
2 things that I want to mention in learning from the Canyon Lake communication issue. I want the community to understand this is the beginning of the conversation. When we talk about other buildings needing to be closed, this is it. And so when people say, well, I didn't know about it, well, we're talking about it now. We don't want anybody to be surprised. We are concerned, we have issues. We're having this public forum to inform the community that there are some issues going on that's going to cause the board to have to make some hard decisions. To answer, one of the things that I have learned during this process, because I wasn't here for the last bond, is I think, Jamie, to answer to your question, the real question must be to the community, what do they want? Because now it's become comedic now that I think, you know, that we need, you know, some place for, you know, sports and maybe we can have the Olympics come and, you know, that's what I think is, you know, is important, but obviously I have learned that's not what the community. So in answering your question, it's somewhat backwards to ask well, not your questions, you know what I'm saying? It's more important to find out, community, what do you think is important? And then we take what they've said and then modify whatever bond. That's what I've learned. Because in leadership, we talked about doing a survey to take the temperature of the community to see where they are in what they would accept in amount, what's important, what area, and those type of things. So
I do want to piggyback on what you said, Jamie, about if you pass it, how long it takes. Sioux Falls passed a bond the year before we did, the fall or right before. They just broke ground last fall on the final building of that bond project. So that's 2019. They broke ground on the last build in 2023. Now, costs and things, I'm sure had a factor in that, and financing and all of that, but it's 4 years. It doesn't just, you don't just do everything at once. We have to find contractors, we have to find supplies, we have to make designs. I mean, all of that takes time. And, you know, sometimes you can do some of that before you bring forward a bond and you can show all the pretty pictures, or you can bring forth the bond and find out what and be very specific. I agree, HVAC renovations is really important, but we were trying to keep the cost down and be able to still show how we could impact it with our personal money. But I will caution us all that this Senate or House Bill 1048E that is going to require significant changes in funding paying our staff may impact our capital outlay. And so, where we thought we were can easily change. That's so much of the hard work that we're trying to do, but the conversation, I'm so thankful we're having it, and to move forward. And I think Coy is going to talk about the survey.
Mr. Sassen, and then Ms. Thomas.
I do not mean to skip the Zoom hand line, but I think a couple of things that you all said is really relevant to the conversation. And so this slide was towards the end, but I think it's okay to bring it right now and talk about it. So as we talked in board leadership earlier this week, some of the potential next steps, first being to determine priorities. And that does not mean that tonight you're going to say these are exactly what's happening in the bond. But I think, every conversation to start to dial in a little bit better what your priorities are and where you think we're headed. One of the things that we also discussed was in the last bond process, the district had a professional survey done. And that was really powerful. And that didn't happen actually until really the package was formed and the referendum was issued. But that survey had very, very specific questions in it regarding the projects included, the amount, very extensive survey, and really, really powerful information. And I think in terms of, is it worth an investment or is it not? That survey came within 3% of what the actual results were of the bond. So it was really, really accurate. And I think given, Bobby did a really fantastic job with a survey that went out. And one of the ideas that we talked about is we got great feedback on that. We saw a lot of support. It would be important to take that a step further and get even outside of that realm, so to speak, of where that survey went and push that survey out further. And I think a part of what could be really beneficial is having sort of an idea of what those priorities are and specifically including them in a survey to take the community's temperature on that and an amount and some of those different things. So I just wanted to mention a couple of those things as you continue your conversations. Thank you, sir.
All right, Ms. Thomas.
So I guess in answer to your question, so the way that they kind of did it the last time, and maybe Christine can chime in at some point if I got something wrong, but there were at least 2 or 3 days where we had hours of conversation, almost like a retreat, where a plan after internally, like you've been doing, kind of came forward. We could do this, this, and this, and what is the priorities, while using the survey from the public. It's a data point. They don't always know, well, because quite often the people that come back with their answers, they're selfish about their own schools, general public might not know, but they might know, we've heard that Robbinsdale is falling, so we think that might be really important to go ahead and close that and make a new school. So it's just a data point. It is just a pulse, but it may not be fully accurate as to what the dire priority needs to be. So that's where we take that into consideration and internally. Jay's not quite done with all of the facilities and the necessary needs. One of the slides back talks about how SPED comes in is weighted at a 5 in several things. Network functionality, classroom size, special education. This is something maybe the public doesn't know. There's certain laws you have to follow. And unfortunately, because of the way that some of the buildings are having to fluctuate with their students, how many certain special education students that need to be within the general public, as well as have these special programs, you have to be able to have that room consistent. And unfortunately, for the most people that need that consistency, it's not been. So for me, seeing and hearing that, that puts that special need on a high priority for me, but the public may not know that. And having each building be consistent across the whole district, having those certain rooms for them, et cetera, means maybe almost all of them need some sort of renovation. That whole plan, all of those tiny little, all of those pieces, I think we need to have a bigger conversation before. And what can we do internally? And maybe we should have that number after, hopefully tomorrow, but if not, by the end of this session, we'll know what we can use internally to show the public what we can do internally versus what we could ask for. So I wouldn't have any number that I'm comfortable with right now, not having all those other pieces together. And I think we should be encouraged to have those day retreats where we have a longer conversation, where we can see some of these data points and understand from each other's point of views what some of these facility tours, what the principals, what the special education, what the maintenance people are seeing as importance for each of those buildings, and then prioritize that.
Right, Mr. Brooklyn.
I was just gonna, to add on to what you said earlier, President Carr, there's kind of a balance there of like, what do we see as a need and what does the community want? For example, like Stevens Theater, I know was always brought up, HVAC. I was trying to scroll through here and there's talks of a third high school. Some of these things we understand are maybe not the highest priority, but we also need people to vote for it. So I think that that's definitely a conversation to be had is, like you said, I don't know that my number matters. My number is probably higher than most people in our community because I understand these needs a little bit more than most people in our community. But at the same time, I want to caution us from trying too hard to gather those who are voting no, no matter what. I think sometimes in these conversations, we try to hit that lowest common denominator, like we're shooting for 100%, but like I always did in college, I wasn't ever shooting for 100% on my final. I was calculating out what is that grade I need to get. I think that's kind of the same thing we need to do here. We're not gonna hit 100%. We need to hit 60%. So I think as we're planning these out and we're looking for what people will vote for, as we're reading through some of these surveys, just off the top of my head here, I see some people are saying $0. We're not gonna vote. We're not gonna get those people. We can't work towards those people. So I just wanna make sure that as we're talking about these things that we're considering needs that we might not necessarily consider essential, but that might be considered essential throughout the community and kind of vice versa there a little bit.
Ms. Stephenson.
Thanks. Do you mind going back to the slide with the now and then the 10-year and then the 10-year with the bond? So my first question is just a little clarification. How is a brand new South Middle School only survey scoring 92?
I'm really glad you asked that.
I have 4 questions, so this is the easy one.
Okay, that one is really easy. So one of the standards that we set on the page that we were just on was internal door locks. And that is a push for safety reasons. So we were too far along after making that standard. We were too far along on South to make the change. So we just decided, hardware's on site. It's already scored at a 92. Is it worth spending, $100,000 on all new hardware in a brand new building just to check a box? So that was the decision there. So yes, I totally understand. It looks a little misleading. Why a brand new school would be 92?
So, I mean, it does mean that pretty much anything in the green is a nice,
Yes,
a great facility.
yes.
I wanted to state, because you're asking us for our priorities, so for me, one of my priorities, and I've been very vocal about this, is not leaving these three bottom schools, Wilson, Robbinsdale, South Park, as is. So I personally don't want to see a 10-year plan or a 10-year plan with a bond that doesn't get, that doesn't get the Wilson, Robbinsdale school or scores up. You've told us tonight, under no uncertain terms, that getting Wilson and Robbinsdale up is an investment that this district can't make. And I think in the interest of clarity to the public, we need to say this. We need to say that the long-term plan is that we probably are not going to be able to keep Wilson and Robbinsdale open if we want equity in our district with the funding that we currently have and with a bond that is not $300 million. I think we need to say that. So I'm not saying that tonight. I'm saying that from me, that's what I would like to see in a 10-year plan. Either we're keeping Wilson and Robbinsdale and here's what we're gonna do to make them equitable, or we're not. My third point, a statement, a question. I'm concerned about our responsibility as a board and as being fiscal stewards of this district with Rapid City Alternative Academy having 75 students. I'm concerned that we're not being good stewards when our 5th highest scoring building for the foreseeable future will be used at a 25% capacity. I understand we have other things going on in there, but our highest priority should be getting kids in good learning facilities. And I would like to have that discussion. I'm not saying that that's the solution, but I want to have that discussion. I don't think it's responsible to not talk about one of our best buildings being used at a 25% capacity. And then actually my only other, so I also don't know how much I want a bond to look at, but I was gonna say what Superintendent Swigart said, that all of this assumes that we don't need a capital outlay transfer. And so having communication with our legislators about the bill that they're gonna be voting on in the next week or so should probably be a high priority of board members.
Right. Ms. Clapham, before, those members that didn't get a chance to answer her question, did anybody else wanna address her question before? All right, if not, then Ms. Clapham.
I really appreciate, Ms. Stevenson pointing out and considering the Rapid City Alternative. I really didn't look at that math and that's why there are 7 of us. And that's why, it's not something that I caught. So I appreciate that. And also say it's really, you said this and I don't want to beat it to horse, but it is a very fine line because I definitely hear what you're saying with Shop Card, let's hear the community. But I also hear, and Ms. Stevenson has said in other conversations that the experts are telling us what we need. So yes, I understand that the community may want this, and that's great. But our job is to do what our students need. So does that meet somewhere in the middle? Absolutely. But I think we also have to, in our heads, balance that. Yes, let's make it so everyone wants this, but I think it's also, we have to educate on this is what we need. We are doing and being responsible in what we absolutely need. We know that we don't truly have an ideal plan for 400 kids when Wilson Robbinsdale. We don't. Could we put them in the States? Absolutely. I can tell you if it was my child and not having a learning center or the learning center person being in a closet, I would not be okay with that. I'd have a major issue with that. It would be what we'd have to do, but I wouldn't be okay with it. So I think we do balance and to point out, as Tom was saying, the data points, but and we spoke to and everybody wasn't necessarily present, but the kind of survey we're talking about, the near accuracy it has is really pretty darn impressive. Multiple districts have done similar surveys through companies. Within 1 to 2% of what the survey says is what the election actually happens. So when we say like we have this data point, like it's pretty darn close. If we get a picture of a bond and it says 62% of people, our odds are really, really good of making it happen. So I think that survey is important, but we have to have something to offer in the survey. We have to say, well, this is our, these are our 3 priorities or whatever. So I just think, like I said, it is a fine balance, and I get like serving our community, and that is what we're here to do. But part of that serving the community is what these kids need. And I said the fact that 5 years down the road, they're on that last building, it gives me anxiety knowing where those bottom 5 schools are, that we're 5 years away from really being able to create that capacity for them. And that our community needs to understand and hear that and know, and I also think I appreciate pointing out, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I want that the Vicky Powers property, is it correct that it's a smaller plot of land that is harder to expand? And that's also one of the considerations, that it shouldn't be but so big, where the other ones that you've pointed out, we could grow, which is also being forward looking as if we needed to make changes or increase capacity.
You nailed it.
All right, let me suggest this. I see Mrs. Stephenson and Ms. Thomas. Mr. Sassy, you were halfway through the presentation, or how much more of presentation do you have?
That's really it, President Carr. Talk a little bit about next steps, but we've sort of covered that, so I think we're in a good spot.
Okay, all right, Mrs. Stephenson.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up with what Mrs. Clapham was saying about the survey being accurate. I think we should see, and we've talked about this, but I think we should see the survey also, not just an opportunity to gather information, but an opportunity to get information out there. Our district has stated that priorities are this, and this. This would cost this much in a bond. Would you support that bond? If not, what would you support? I think that it's an opportunity to educate the community on what our highest needs are right now, and to give them a preview of what we might be asking. So I think the survey should be pretty specific as to what we kind of think we might want to ask for. And then we decide whether, based on the results. I just also wanted to say for the record that when I talk about Rapid City Alternative Academy, it is in no way judgment on what's happening at that program or those schools. Same with Rapid City High School. I think they're an essential part of our district, and I am in no way being reflective of that. I just want to talk about the use of facility space.
Okay, Mrs. Thomas.
I wanted to comment on that too. I think we have to consider that it's not that it's 25% use. There's a part of that. I'm not sure what part is included in how much space. If you're saying that whole thing isn't being, like half of it, 75% isn't being used, that's because it's literally falling. We can't put students in 2 or 3 of those rooms. A large part of it, and maybe that's something else you should do, is walk through and take a look at it too. We can't put anybody in there. So so I'm not sure if that was the part that they were saying is not being used. But regardless, with this new program, we have been losing teachers for behavioral problems. This is one way, this new program, to hopefully stabilize that, especially with the middle school, since we've noticed that is an high priority before they even get to high school. The other thing is, and we can have a further conversation. I don't want to belabor this one, but as you said, you wanted a conversation at some point. But next year there may be more kids than the 25% that you said. If that's where they need to be, one of our highest priorities is student achievement. If this program is achieving student achievement, I don't care if there's 10 kids, that's 10 more that have achieved something that we were able to provide for, since that is the top priority and goal for the district, for the board. to the survey, I'm not sure, I think I might have been misunderstood. I didn't, if there's a survey and part of the questions are very specific, if you knew that this problem was at this building, would this be a priority? You know, that type of thing, that's fine. I was thinking in terms of just putting a question out there to everybody saying, what are your priorities with no background? That is not educational enough, I guess. That's what I meant by that.
All right, Mr. Berkeley.
I guess I'm not.
It's getting late and I'm getting tired, so I'm letting things go loose right now, so. Yeah.
I just think it's super important that it's really hard to lock down Rapid City Alternative Academy's student population, because you have to look at like the Title I-D program that I oversaw, which is the GED, the homebound, the suspension expulsion. Those are not Rapid City Alternative Academy students, but they're in that building. So, you know, when we talk about the number of kids in that building, you know, the virtual kids can come into the building and get help if they're stuck. So we can't always lock down Rapid City Alternative Academy to who's in that building at that given day. Also, it's incredibly important to remember a couple of other things about that building. It is not accurate to look at the outside of that building and think that that is the number, that is the amount of size that we have, and students can be in all parts of that building. On the first floor, there are literally 3 classrooms, period. No classrooms in that building would be what I think Jamie would refer to as adequate space for modern learning for some, like you absolutely could not put an elementary school in that building without investing significant change in the structure of the classrooms, because they are not built to have the centers and everything that elementary classrooms need today. The classrooms are the sizes that they were when they built them to be a high school. Even after the remodeling, the classrooms are the same size, they're small. You have to realize that the gym is in the center of that building and the theater is in the center of that building, and we don't own that theater. I mean, we have this longstanding agreement with the Performing Arts Center. So there's so many things that have to be, we can't put a program in there that's using the gym on the 3rd and 4th floor, because we have an agreement with the PAC about how that gym space can be utilized because of theater performances. There's layers to that conversation, I guess, that we would need to have. And I would stress that we closed it as a middle school for a reason. It wasn't adequate. When we moved all of the alternative programs in there, the reason we moved them in there is because the alternative programs had smaller class sizes. So we were never planning on packing those rooms full, because we were giving teachers their smaller class sizes. So can we have conversations? Absolutely. But I think we have to have conversations with our eyes open about the limitations that that building has, even though, yes, it is absolutely gorgeous. It is so beautiful. It is a fantastic space, but it's a fantastic space that has to be used in a way that fits the educational needs of whatever we put in there. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. Can you go back to the slide where you had the like functional capacities? And okay, so that 757 number, that's like, what class size, I guess, are we looking at with that? Was that the same class size used at Central or Stephen?
Yes, I think I use the same class size, which is, I think, 28.
Okay, so then that's another consideration in there. Okay, thank you for that. I guess I totally see where you're coming from, Christine, and I don't think that Christine or anyone here is saying that we don't need a program like this. As we're looking at, where do we put these programs? I think it is a very valid question to ask, like, is this the best use of this awesome space that we have? So I just wanted to point that out there, that yes, it says 757, and I agree that 75 might be a little low, but we might be growing. So there's a lot to get in there, but I did really just want to emphasize that I don't think you or anyone else is saying, let's get rid of this program. It's a great program, and you know that, and I know that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was, to bring up, because it was on that last slide that you had, was timing. And Sarah had brought it up a little bit too, about when to do this. And she had said, and I'll text her later, I guess. She had made the statement that if we want it needs to be on a normal election. I would actually think the opposite might be true. But regardless, my personal feeling on timing is soon. Kind of like my statement earlier, I think sometimes we get bogged down trying to make this perfect, trying to get exactly, making sure that it's going to go. And I do think it's worth it to take some surveys, take a little bit of time. But I also don't want us to keep putting this off, trying to make this perfect bond that, as we saw from the previous bond, doesn't exist. Yeah. And so I just wanted to also get that conversation out there a little bit as well on timing.
Yes, ma'am.
I also forgot to mention that when they talk about the rooms and the part of the building, if you look at Rapid City High School, part of that campus is the tech center behind, up on the, kind of on the hill to the right. That when we talk about a building sliding off the hill, that is a perfect example. Everything on the Columbus side of that building really isn't usable. We literally have 2x4 frames in the middle of rooms holding it up. My computer just went dead, so I'm no longer online. I apologize. So if we're applying for a CTE grant, big dream, fingers crossed, because of the need and what we want to do, our best thinking at this point is if we could take down that building and put a CTE center there in conjunction with Rapid City Alternative Academy, we'd have the lunchroom, we'd have the administration, we'd have the parking lot, we'd be able to hook into the geothermal heating situation. We could design it, and that campus there would be a really ideal location if we're building from scratch a CTE center. So that would also mean that we could tie in some CTE classwork in the main building, things like that. So I wanted to share that square footage is included and capacity wise, but really not a smart use of capacity right now based on the way that building is.
Well, yeah, so we could revise that number if the 757 is based on square footage that isn't usable.
No, so it does take out a couple of those classrooms. So that factors in everything but I think 2 classrooms in the vocational building. And that is an absolute perfect scenario.
Mm-hmm.
That's assuming there is 28 kids per classroom. I mean, it's just, the building just isn't used in that way. So all that's saying is we can put 800 or almost 800 kids in there. Doesn't mean we should, so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Thank everybody. Again, another excellent presentation. These study sessions seem to be getting better and better. And I just want to communicate to the community that these are our initial conversations about bonds and facilities and priorities. And we are very aware that we are going to tap into every interest group in our, what's the key word? Stakeholders. That's what I learned that since I've been on the board. That's a very important word. So we are very conscious that we're going to contact and connect with every stakeholder before anything firms up. And I was thinking about an analogy. It's very, from what Mr. Berkland said and Ms. Clapham said, and all everybody said, this process is very difficult. Coming up with one solid thing It would be like the seven of us trying to decide on the flavor of a wedding cake. Imagine that, the seven of us trying to figure out of all the different variations. And while that's comical, that's really kind of, okay, do we build on the west side? Do we build? It's very difficult. And I'm with Mr. Berkland in the fact that we have to be, we can't be so in our own headspace of what we want that we can't coalesce, because we have to do something. I mean, we can't talk about it for 2 years. So we have to coalesce around an idea, and while it might not be your perfect plan, again, we have to get something passed, something palatable to the voters. So, all right. And I don't know whose idea, Mrs. Thomas, I think that's a wonderful idea for us as we go through that process to have not day long, but half a day long sessions and conversations.
They
about
can be a day
future.
long. Last time Christine brought macaroons
Oh. you
or
brought
little
macaroons.
cupcakes, cheesecake. Yeah.
Yeah, but
From
yeah, I think
pistachio
those
pie.
longer conversations are
Voluntold.
Yeah.
important. All right, anything else before I call for I don't know where all right. At this time, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Those opposed, we don't hear you. No, we do. All right.